From what I've seen working in this industry, if you ask most sales reps, they truly believe that they're uncovering a prospect's pain when setting appointments. So what happens is they'll, be going through a call and a customer will say something along the lines of, oh yeah, the windows that we have are super old. Or they'll say something like, yeah, we've, always really wanted to redo our deck. We just kind of never got around to doing it. And the rep is like, okay, I understand what they need. So they nod, they log that info, and then they decide to book the call. But unfortunately for them, that kind of answer doesn't create urgency. That kind of answer doesn't drive a demo, and that kind of service level pain absolutely doesn't stick around when the price shows up, right? So in this video, I'm going to walk you through why most traditional need uncovering actually fails, even though, it's commonly taught at some very big and successful companies. And I'll show you how to actually go deeper in a way that feels natural and isn't pushy, so that your appointments don't just set, but instead they actually stick, show, and they consistently close. So in order to do that, I'm going to start from the very top. So still in 2025, tons of companies train their reps to ask questions like, hey, is it leaking? Or are you seeing a draft? Or, is there mold in your bathroom? And to many of you watching this video right now, on paper, these questions might seem like decent sales strategy. You're trying to find the pain so that you can actually book in the job, right? But what you or the reps that you're working with don't realize is that these are what we would call push questions. And as you've probably heard me explain on a previous video, when urgency comes from you, that's when it feels like pressure, to the prospect. And pressure is the number one reason why homeowners push back against you and your sales reps. And to make matters even worse than, just simply kind of pushing your prospects away, these kind of questions can actually create what is called reverse urgency. So to give you an example, let's say you ask your prospect a question like, hey, is your roof leaking, right? And that prospect replies, no, it's not leaking. Do you know what's happened there? Well, suddenly what's happening is that you've got your prospect talking themselves out of the project. Now they've stated that the roof isn't actually leaky, many of them will start to think to themselves, well, maybe it can actually wait because it's not that bad yet. So instead of building urgency, the script that you just read from has actually removed it. And that's the hidden danger behind conventional strategies. They kind of feel logical, but they often kill momentum, which means that in today's day and age, these are unfortunately redundant strategies, even though they were common practice 10 or 15 years ago. Now, just to repeat something that I said earlier, because it is very, very important, urgency that comes from you feels like pressure, whereas urgency that comes from the prospect feels like great insight, right? And that statement right there is at the heart of what we call the pull methodology. And what that means is instead of telling the customer what they should care about, your goal should be instead to guide them to discover that answer for themselves. And the most effective way to be able to do this is to be able to ask the right open-ended questions, phrased in the right way, and said in the right tone. Now, again, if you've seen the video before about the 5-question flow, which if you haven't, I'll attach to this video, then you already know the structure that we use to go deeper and, to really elicit pain for the prospect. But this video isn't, about us going through that flow in detail. Today, we want to talk about why that structure matters in the first place. So let me show you what it looks like when it's done wrong, and then I'll also show you what it looks like when done correctly. So let's say a customer says, yeah, the windows that we have are just kind of getting a bit old. If you're using a traditional script, then, your rep may say something like, okay, makes sense. Have you found that they're drafting or, is there kind of condensation on the windows? And then after they get a reply, the rep will then probably say, okay, and, are those windows something that you want to get replaced kind of before the winter comes around, right? But again, This is pressure because you haven't allowed them to tell you what matters. In actuality, through your questions, you're trying to guess what matters to them, right? So instead, here's what we found is a better way to do this, right? So when you're looking to uncover pain in a prospect and, give them a reason to actually care about you coming out to that appointment, you want to start by asking, what are you noticing that you're not kind of too crazy about, right? And this one question, and again, it can be used for whatever niche you're working in, is soft, it's non-threatening, and it gives the prospect permission to actually talk about their problems. So, for example, they might say something along the lines in the Windows instance, yeah, well, the windows just kind of fog up and we can't really see through them anymore, right? Now, we've gone from old Windows to the fact that it's inconvenient. To me, that's progress. But we don't want to stop there. So next, you might want to ask something along the lines of, okay, well, where are you noticing this issue the most, right? And in response, let's say that the prospect says something like, well, it's in the kitchen and the living room. Honestly, it's the whole back of the house, really. Again, something that you may have heard before. And, now we've gone from, just an issue to an issue in specific areas, which in this place are high traffic, family spaces, which oftentimes are places that hold, a lot of emotional real estate in the house, right? So next, after that, we don't want to stop right there. We're then going to ask, okay, that makes sense. And, how long have you been actually, finding this issue? How long has this been going on for? And they could say something along the lines of, oh, well, we've been dealing with this for about, 4 to 5 years, right? And this question specifically allows you to have some ammunition if they try to push the appointment off, because you've actually got, this very powerful thing they just said to come back to. So, for example, let's say, it's coming to book the appointment and they try and stall, they say they're not kind of ready right now. You can say something like this. Okay, yep, completely understand, Oscar. But I remember earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that you guys have been going through this for 4 or 5 years. And with that being said, I'd hate for you to kind of go through another season of that again. And this type of communication, this type of language allows you to avoid a common objection without pushing them, but instead pulling them with their own words, not ours, right? So again, I digress. After asking how long they've experienced this issue, you then want to ask them, okay, and what have you done up to date to actually cope with this problem? And, in the instance of the windows, they could say something like, yeah, well, we just kind of wipe them down or we open them, but, in all honesty, that hasn't really been helping, right? So now we're opening the door for them to, again, not just talk about these foggy windows, but speak about the frustration that comes with actually trying to fix this problem. And then finally, at this point, once they've admitted that they have a real problem, a real issue, then you want to ask them, okay, and have you had anybody come out to take a look about, what else might be going on that's causing this problem? And when they say no, or they say something like, yeah, we did a couple of years ago, but it didn't really help, that is the moment that the appointment should become obvious to the prospect, right? Not because you've pushed for it, but because they've just talked themselves into it. And as they say, the customer's always right. Now, if you're watching this as a founder or a sales leader, or frankly, even just a rep yourself, then you want to listen up, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see reps make, especially when they're calling age leads that, you should be looking out for, you should be trying to think about yourself, is that reps frequently stop at the first answer. So, for example, a customer could say, hey, the deck that we have, it's really old, right? And, a rep says, got it. What I'd like to do is, get you booked in for a quote to see if we can get that fixed for you. And like I've said before, things like just old aren't urgency, right? That's just simply a label. And one thing that you also have to remember is that nobody spends $15,000 because something's just old, right? So the first answer is the surface. That's kind of where you start, but that shouldn't be where you finish. And that's why we consistently drill the idea of going deep, not wide, to our reps. And as you've seen in our kind of pull versus push video, again, if you haven't, that'll be connected to this video here. You might remember me saying this quote or something along these lines. You don't need 20 problems, you just need one that hurts bad enough, right? And what I meant when I kind of said that is that you're not trying to gather this kind of long list of problems that they have. You're simply trying to find that one issue that they actually feel, and then you can kind of build that urgency around that. So, for example, we worked with a large home improvement company in Kansas. They sell windows, sidings, doors, things of that nature. And they have a huge canvassing footprint. And interestingly, they actually generate tons of sweepstake leads, which not a ton of companies do nowadays. And they were calling hundreds of leads per day, but their close rates on those leads were still stuck at around 17% week after week. And here's the thing, their reps were trained, they were polite, they were setting tons of appointments, but when I listened to their calls, I saw the same thing again and again. Their reps got surface level answers because they asked surface level questions, which led to them building surface level urgency. So, for example, customers would say something like, okay, our windows are drafty, again, to kind of harp on about the windows example. And in this case, let's talk about their windows. So our windows are drafty, right? And without asking any more questions, they would again go straight into, okay, great. Does Tuesday at 6 work for us to come out and give you a quote to see if we can solve that problem for you? And again, a lot of times, because they had a good presence, their reps were trained, they would, book that appointment, but there's no emotion there, right? And what we're not doing is digging deeper, and we're not eliciting any pain. So what I did to solve the problem is we rolled out the 5-question flow that I just quickly showed you earlier, right? And we trained their reps on the tonality to ensure they were asking the questions correctly. We also practiced going back in when a rep felt like they hadn't uncovered enough pain, right? And finally, we focused on helping the customers name their own urgency rather than trying to guess it for them. So obviously, you guys are probably interested in what actually changed and how that impacted. Well, within 90 days, their close rate went from 17% all the way up to 29%. Their reschedules dropped by 36%. And the most surprising stat, at least to me, was that their average job size increased by 12% on an average order value that was already significantly higher than their competitors. And, this was the exact same team. They were selling the exact same product. All they were doing were asking deeper questions, which ultimately led to, more emotional buy-in before their sales rep ever showed up to the house, right? So if there's one thing from this video to remember, it's that surface level complaints don't close. They don't survive quotes. They don't justify financing your product, and they definitely don't stick around when life gets busy, right? And if your reps are still setting appointments off of statements like it's just old, then you need to understand that you are leaving money on the table, because just setting an appointment isn't the goal of a quote unquote appointment setter. The actual goal is to create an emotional commitment to the appointment. And that only happens when the lead hears themselves say, this situation, this problem I have isn't okay anymore, right? Now, if you're watching this and you're realizing that your team is probably only going surface level, or your call center is booking appointments that, seem fine on the phone, but they actually, fall apart as soon as the price comes out from the sales rep, then these type of problems are exactly what we fix, right? We help home improvement companies install back-end sales systems, including, appointment setting scripts, call coaching, reactivation campaigns, cross-sell campaigns, you name it. And all of these build urgency the right way that turn cold, curious, and, just casual leads into booked jobs, not just booked appointments, right? So if you want to see how this could look inside your team, then shoot me a message or click the link below. And as always, if you found the video helpful, then make sure to hit subscribe. I'm breaking down tactical back-end revenue strategies like this every single week so you can get more out of the leads that you already have. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.